John Rudolph, Bryan Smith, here talking today, AeroTalk, about stage checks. And I think it's more preparation not only for stage checks, but just in general, right? You know, lessons in general. So the first question, I guess, to kick off the whole thing here is, what are we seeing right now at the airport is troublesome on stage checks right now? And I think as you know, you can do course specific if you want, but also just as a generality.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that I'm seeing, I guess, across the spectrum is the students showing up unprepared or not knowing how much to prepare. And I guess that's one of the troubles, right, is you don't know what you don't know. But you do have the ACS, you've got your resources, you got your CFIs, and you've got your professors who have prepared you. So make sure that you are going through, studying your appropriate notes, referencing your applicable ACS. You know, if you're doing your private pilot check, private pilot ACS, you know, it tells you everything that you're going to encounter on that check, right? And then in addition to, there's some great study guides out there, you know, either ones that you can purchase or are available on the internet. Basically, you just want to make sure that you're going through and preparing yourself. The last thing you want to do is show up, be in the stage check, and be like, ooh, I definitely didn't prepare well enough. So I'd rather know more than I need and be like, ooh, that was really easy. I definitely over-prepared, than be in that moment and be like, ooh, I should have studied this some more.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think the big thing for all students is confidence. The instructors have done their job. If the students do their job, this is a review briefing and a review flight.
Yeah.
So do your job, just like Bryan was saying, making sure that you really look at the ACS. We have a lot of resources on Blackboard, stuff that students can go ahead and reference, being prepared for checks. SAC has put a lot of work into those, working with managers and assistant chiefs at the airport. So,
you know, and we see this in 482, which is the final course, obviously, but you see people coming unprepared still. And I think that starts way at the beginning, and nobody can force feed, you know, them to memorize this stuff. But a lot of this stuff is just rote memorization, you know, obviously the comprehension side of it, but starting out is just rote memorization, especially with flows and stuff.
That's the normal side of it. That's the first level learning, obviously, right? So rote is good. Once you start off that, you can go ahead and build off of that. And just for 325, we say it all the time, you know, systems, what's going to be different from your commercial side of it? This is your commercial multi-engine add-on. So anything multi-engine, utilize the ACS. The ACS is your helping guide.
Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest things that I see in 222 and 415 is they have, you know, some of the rote understanding, you know, reading off the approach plate and all that stuff, you know, like that's fine. Just, you know, throwing out numbers, you know, what does it mean? You know, you got to go from rote to understanding, application, and correlation, just throwing out, you know, the basic stuff, knowing how to, you know, for example, on an instrument approach, how to apply your MDA versus your DA, and then what does it mean? You know, how do I modify it? You know, is there something on this that goes a little bit deeper to modify that approach? And it doesn't even have to be something as complex as an instrument approach plate. You know, it could be something as simple as, you know, in 102, you're talking about V speeds, right? You know, why does your maneuvering speed change with weight? You know, just having that number memorized as part of your V speeds, part of it, but you have to take it to the application correlation level of, you know, if my weight is this, it's going to be a higher stall speed versus a lower weight, it's going to be a lower stall speed, right? So does the student understand that? That's all going to be part of the check, and going beyond just memorizing the numbers.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing for students to understand too is it's not how you do things. They're going to learn that all the way through. If you're learning and all of a sudden you're asking yourself why, and the instructor's not answering that, ask that question. Don't hesitate. That's what they're there for. Knowing how you do one thing is fine, but why, if you're going after the why, you're going to hit that application correlation level very, very easy.
Yeah, that goes to the instructors too. I mean, I get asked questions all the time, and I'm like, I don't know, but we'll find it. You know, and that we've been taught that, you know.
Sure.
Always say you don't know, but we can find it together, or, you know, show them where to find the information at. So do you think the preparedness part comes from time? Like a time management thing?
I think it definitely could, especially with newer students. They don't really know how much time to spend preparing for something. I was even talking with some of the leads that are teaching ground school this semester, 102 and 221. And I was like, what are you guys seeing in class? We're a couple weeks into the semester now. What are you guys seeing? And a lot of what I'm seeing, again, is unpreparedness. So students aren't spending enough time studying for one reason or another. They're not utilizing their resources. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing is with the new incoming students is they don't really know how to manage that time. And I know a couple of students have gone to their professor and be like, hey, I don't know how to properly study. I'm going through stuff, but I don't know exactly what I'm doing. So again, going back as far as like what to properly study, for stage checks in particular, obviously you want to reference your ACS, but for ground school, you want to make sure that you're referencing what's in that particular block. For that course, that TCO is still going to guide what you are learning in that block and then using just that particular information. But, a lot goes into preparation. One of the big things I always tell my students is for an hour of ground school or flight, you're going to spend about 2 hours preparing. So if you've got a 2-hour flight, you need to spend about 4 hours preparing for that flight, reading through the TCO, making sure you understand what maneuvers you're going to do, and then referencing your standardization manual for the setups and flows and all of that stuff that goes into it. And then referencing the ACS, if I'm going to be held to these standards for this maneuver, say we're doing, ground reference maneuver turns around a point today. What are my standards that I need to maintain for this, right? There's a lot of studying that goes on into the background, and I feel like some of those incoming students don't know what all they need to be looking at to be studying. So I think that having a good base of, what should I be referencing versus, what I shouldn't be referencing for this particular case is going to help them actually manage their time well. And then I always applaud the students for wanting to, go out and get a job and have a part-time job while they're doing this. But one of the conversations I end up having a lot in review boards is, did you come to UND to work at Starbucks or did you come to UND to fly airplanes? Because I need to have you to have time built into your schedule to be out at the airport as well as away from the airport studying and showing up prepared. There's a lot that goes into it, and I feel like a lot of those new students, they don't know how much time it truly takes to prepare themselves outside of the airplane to show up prepared for lessons and ground briefings.
Okay.
That's a big part of it. I always tell students when you fly, that is your part-time job. If you have 3 or 4 classes plus flying, prepping and all that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Bryan said it best, though, is you're here to fly, but sometimes you have to work. I was that way when I first started out. I had a job, flying, doing all that fun stuff. I had to pay on my own. It's a lot of work, but if you do it right, if you ask for help when you need help, don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, and this is the time to start building those study habits, because it doesn't end when you leave here. You go to the airlines, you're going to do this all over again, right? You're going to be in ground school for 6 weeks, and if you don't have those study habits down, you're really going to struggle. And another thing too, some people say, well, my only job is to study and get my type rating when I go to the airlines. Yes, that's true, but you're going to have outside factors still, family stuff, whatever it is. So this is the time to really start buckling down. And if you need help, ask. I mean, all of us, any of us, the assistant chiefs, the chiefs, anybody can help you with study habits, but make sure you got the study habits down.
That's the big thing, is work together. If one person has a question, the other person probably has the same question. If you work together as a team and study together as a team, those check rides are going to be very, very easy. Same with ground school. If you work together, study together, prep together, that's going to help you in that class moment too.
Absolutely. The biggest thing is I don't know you need help if you don't tell me you need help. But to build on what John said, like some of the most impactful learning I had when I was a student is, we would get together in a briefing room and, say, for example, a friend was struggling to understand the pedostatic system, right? So we would all just get together and go through our notes and be like, all right, so this is how it works, And next thing I know, like I'm teaching my friend how the pedostatic system works in the airplane, and it helps me understand it, helps them understand it. Like, get together with your friends, form a good study group, and, you guys just tackle your studying together. And like one of the best ways to learn the material is try to teach it to somebody. So, like I said, teach your friend the pedostatic system, right? Or teach your friend cross-country procedures, whatever you're doing for that particular block or lesson.
And when I was at the airlines, the first few months, the night before, and we were talking about this, for every hour of flight, 2 hours of studying, I would sit and look at all the approach plates going into these bigger airports. I'd never flown before. you know, and departures and the fixes and transitions, you know, because you're given these clearances and they change your clearance and you can't read it back and JFK's yelling at you, you know. So even though you've done these approaches 1,000 times here in Grand Forks, if it's part of your stage check, you need to make sure you brush up on those and understand what you could possibly get. Chair flying, for example.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Chair flying is a great way to do it. You know, when I was flying for Rydell, you know, say we were flying out of Salt Lake City that day, I was looking through the airport map, making sure that I understood the airport, because, you know, they got 4 different runways. You never know which one they're going to send you to. You know, sure, it could be the one closest to the terminal where you're at, but, you know, it may not be for that day, and that's, so you need to be familiar with that. The different frequencies, all of the different departures, you know, obviously we're departing to the northeast that day, so I'm anticipating this departure, but, you know, they could change their mind, and, you know, it could be as you're getting your clearance, it could be on upwind. You know, you never know. So chair flying, all that stuff, you know, what to expect will help you in that moment. Be like, you know, if they change something up on you, it's not that big of a deal. You've already thought through it. So kind of phasing that into what the student could do here, I think spending a lot more time chair flying. And just kind of going through, you know, like, how am I mentally going to prepare for this? You know, it could be something as simple as, you know, your power off stall, right? You know, you just kind of walk through it in your mind of how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to set up, and then visualize yourself doing it, and that's going to help you perform it better in the airplane. I think one of the underutilized things that we have here at UND that's a great resource for students that is free is our VR lab and then the sims in the ALC. Students can definitely jump in there, work through flows. If they're struggling with that, they could do basic maneuver setup, basic maneuvers in there, and all of that's free to the student and just helps reinforce that learning and that studying.
Having students have a plan. There's a plan that you're going to go into for the actual flight. I mean, you and I went through this training when we built the CRJ program and did all that. You may have planned it, but things change. Expect that change. Everything that happens in a flight side is supposed to go that way, but not all the time does it actually happen that way. Mm-hmm. So runways change, approaches change, approaches out of service or it goes down, flight check comes in. Being flexible, knowing your plan, but also being able to adapt, that's huge.
Okay. Someone getting ready for their private pilot, they're brand new students to UND. Let's talk a little bit about stage checks. If you had the optimal plan for a student, very general, obviously, what's the optimal study plan, do you think, to get them ready for any of their stage checks? And this can be for any of the courses, obviously, but especially ones who are just new to this.
Yeah, definitely. So I think having a game plan going into it of how you want to prepare yourself is going to be great. So obviously the stage pilot can ask you anything on that oral portion, but they're all going to be based off of specific ACS tasks, right? So having a good understanding of those specific tasks, and there's some study materials out there that they've got some general questions based off those ACS tasks. As long as you understand, you know, you obviously don't want to memorize those questions and answers because that's not going to help you. They could ask you anything. But if you understand the material behind that question, then the examiner could ask you anything they want regarding that question, and you'd be able to speak to it, right? So, like, again, going back to, you know, why does our maneuvering speed change with weight? You know, the examiner could ask that question 10 different ways, but if you understand the context behind it, it doesn't matter how they ask it, you'll be able to answer that question. So I think that would be a good building block for a student is to, you know, develop a plan, go through it, have some scenarios that they can work through, you know, some questions, guided questions, you know, and kind of get some studying. That'll also help identify some weak areas for them. So, you know, like, for example, if they're struggling in a specific area, they'll be like, ooh, I don't understand this as well as I thought I did. I need to spend some more time diving into that. And then obviously you want to start preparing, you know, for that stage check ahead of time. I guess one of the nice things about the TCO is when you start the course, you can have a general idea of when you're going to finish it based off your progression, right? So we know starting in 102, we finish at lesson 30. So as you're getting into those, you know, early 20 lessons, you know that in-course stage check is coming up as well as the intermediate stage check. So now is a great time to start preparing for it. The time to start preparing for that stage check is not when you get that AIMS assignment email. You want to start preparing for that weeks ahead of time, making sure that when you get that email for the assignment, you're ready to go. That's not the time to start studying.
Okay.
Private pilot's huge. Once you get going into that private pilot side, once you pass that check ride, I don't look at you just as a student. I look at you as a fellow aviator. Being safe, being in the airplane, being in the airspace, that's huge. So Bryan said it in one of his comments there of utilizing the ACS, but more importantly, the TCO. Utilize your instructor. Your instructor is your first line of defense for everything. Utilize the leads. Utilize us assistant chiefs. We're always there to help. But studying the right things, utilizing things you have from class, from notes, your notes from every flight. Make sure you're working with your classmates. That will obviously help, because there's going to be a lot of people in the same area, but there's going to be some people that are ahead of you, and there's some maybe people behind you. Everybody trains differently, but work together in a group, and you will all be successful at some point.
You know, you talked about confidence before, John, and I think confidence comes from preparedness. If you show up prepared and you're confident with your answer when you're going for the oral or even the flight or whatever, that's prepared. You're prepared for that. You have confidence in the answer. If you kind of dance around the answer a little bit, the examiner's going to be like, well, maybe we should make sure that they know this answer a little bit more. So that's another thing to be very vigilant of. And also, when you get the Ames email, you need to be ready to go.
That
you
means
can't
you're
just
ready
say,
to go.
I'll do it when I feel like doing it. That email means you are next in line.
That means that state check pilot's going to go ahead and call you, and you're going to go ahead and say, yes, I'm ready.
Yes.
And get that oral done. The flight should be right after.
But what happens if they're not ready and they decide, I'm going to push it out a little bit?
They might be able to be taken off that state check list.
Right.
Then that delays your training, that delays your preparedness. You may have to do a review flight or a review briefing. It all comes down to time, all comes down to money. This is expensive the way it is. We don't need to make it more expensive.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, big thing to remember on that Ames email when it comes out, you know, that's, like I said earlier, that's not the time to start preparing. You should be prepared. If that stage pilot calls and says, hey, can you meet me in 45 minutes to do your oral, your answer should be, yes, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if the flight is, you know, even that afternoon or the next day, you should also be ready for that. So that's one of the big things for, I think, students to work on is being prepared for that check and knowing that they are, again, going back to the confidence, right? You know, we as examiners can tell if the student is, you know, confident or not confident in their answer. If they're kind of answering the question with a little bit of inflection at the end, like it's a question, you'd be like, is it this? Right? You know, I can tell maybe you don't know the answer. So that's going to, you know, that's going to cause me to probe a little bit more into that answer and be like, all right, so do you actually know the answer to this?
Yeah. Or are you just saying what you have memorized one line of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was going to say something with that state checklist too. If the state checklist gets long, we have the ability as state check pilots to call down that list. That's why if you're on that list, that's not time just to relax. It's not time to not be prepared.
Yeah.
If it's a bad weather day, you may get called. State check pilots call down that list and say, hey, I got time for an oral today at 2. Do you have time? And your answer should be yes. Because
And
if
you'd
not,
want
you
it
might
to be
sit
yes.
there. Oh, absolutely.
Because on those bad weather days, you're getting something completed. And then when the weather's nice, you're not doing your oral, you're doing the flight.
focused on flying.
You know, and
Absolutely.
especially when you start getting into the winter months, that's far and few in between sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, these really nice days in September and coming October, we wished we had these in December, January, February. So
Let's talk about the flight. So obviously you're going to go up. You're going to go up and do maneuvers. But it's not just show me a stall. Okay, great, your stall's done. Show me a short field landing. Okay, great, you know how to do a short field landing. There's got to be some aeronautical decision that's being judged also.
I'm looking for confidence. So I always tell students I want a confident, competent, safe pilot. So it all wraps in together, right? So they can go ahead and go and do all the things they're supposed to do from checklists. I see a lot of people that go ahead and memorize the checklist, but they don't use the checklist. So verifying the checklist, that's how we live as pilots, by a checklist. Making sure we can do it all. Like you said, ADM, that's huge. We as instructors need to be preparing our students for that ADM and giving them different situations. It's not the same all the time, and learning that way. So.
Yeah, and talking ADM, you know, go, no-go decisions, you know, obviously on the bad weather days, you know, it's really high winds, the ceiling's really low. You know, if the wind's blowing at 40 knots, obviously that's not going to work. If the ceiling's, you know, it's overcast at 200 and we're, you know, trying to do, you know, a private pilot check for that day, obviously that's not going to work either. But I also see it go to the other extreme where we're weathering on days that we probably shouldn't, you know, 18 knot winds and, you know, 4,000 foot ceilings. We've got plenty of room and those are plenty light enough winds to do everything we need to do for all levels of checks.
Every course.
And I've even seen 414s that'll weather in those conditions. I'm like, for what? We can go get this check done. Like, let's go. We should be in the airplane right now. So it goes both ways, you know, where I want to make sure that they're exercising that good aeronautical decision making and not going into an unsafe environment, you know, whether it's icing, high winds, low clouds, that sort of stuff. But I also don't want them to be too cautious. If there's a ability for us to go, we should be going.
Yep, I agree, 100%. Yeah. So last thing here, guys, before we wrap up, what is one bit of advice that you can give to every course, everyone doing a stage check, each of you? What's one bit of advice you've kind of given your confidence? What was that again?
Being confident, competent, and safe.
There you go.
Those are the three things that I look for on every check ride. Big thing in the end of it is I want to make sure that they understand that this is real. Flying is no joke. If we don't do it right, safety could be compromised, and we don't want to do that. But looking in the end, I want to make sure that they understand that this should be fun as well. You should be proud of yourself by the time that you get ready for this. When you get done, you should be able to look back at that airplane and look, you know, shake your hand of your stage check pilot, and walk out of that my office or Bryan's office or other stage check pilots, and like, you know, I just did that. I'm a private pilot, or I'm a commercial multi-engine pilot. You should be proud of your accomplishments. So.
Yeah, so two things, I guess, to kind of piggyback a little bit on what John said. So always make sure you're having fun. Presumably, we all started doing this because we love airplanes. We love being up in the airplane. So every flight should always be fun. If you've ever flown with me, like one of the first questions I ask you when we get out of the airplane, we're walking back into dispatch is, did you have fun? You should always be able to answer yes. I understand some flights don't go so great and it's whatever, but, you know, did we have fun? As long as you're having fun, that's what it's all about, right? Item number 2 is everybody makes mistakes. You know, like even me on, you know, flying the Embraer Phenom. You know, if you think that I have flights that I don't make mistakes, then I've got some beachfront property in Arizona for you, right? You know what I mean? So, but what makes the difference and what makes that professional level and well-prepared pilot is how you recover from those mistakes. So if you're if you're a student on the stage check and you're in that check flight and you make a mistake, just move on. Right? Don't dwell on it. That's going to compound your next mistakes, and it's only going to make it worse. Just recognize the mistake and fix it. You know, like say, for example, you're doing your maneuver, your steep turns. You get high on your altitude, fix it. Don't dwell on it. Just be like, oop, I'm a little high on my altitude. Fix it. Keep flying the maneuver. Move on, right? Don't dwell on it. It's only going to make the rest of the maneuver worse. And if you keep letting those stack up, then it's going to make the rest of the flight worse. Fix it and move on.
Yeah. And the mistakes, I mean, that's part of learning.
Yep.
I mean, in 480, we make mistakes, and that's great. I want them to make those mistakes.
Absolutely.
But when you show up unprepared, you're not confident, and that's where your instructor might get a little frustrated. That's where you're not going to have fun.
Absolutely.
And you brought that on yourself.
Correct.
You know, so show up prepared, I think, is the biggest thing. If anyone's listening to this for the first time and they're just coming to UND Aerospace, just be prepared.
Absolutely.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, John Rudolph, Bryan Smith, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks, Matt.